For most of her 57 years, Claire believed she had life all figured out. Retirement had ushered in a season of calm, mornings spent tending her beloved garden, afternoons lost in historical novels, and quiet evenings curled up beside her husband of over 3 decades, David. Their days flowed with a comforting rhythm, each moment predictable, serene, safe. Surprises, she thought, were for the young or the reckless. But everything changed on a seemingly ordinary Friday night. It began with a simple invitation. Dinner at the home of David's colleague, someone she'd met only in passing. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another social obligation. Or so she thought. What Claire couldn't have known, as she slipped on her favorite necklace and checked her reflection one last time, was that this dinner would shatter the illusion of her perfectly settled life. Because sometimes, it only takes one evening, one conversation, one look, to unravel decades of certainty. And as the night unfolded, Claire would come to face a part of herself she never knew still existed. The house was charming, an elegant colonial with glowing porch lights and jasmine drifting through the evening air. Claire felt a flicker of nervousness as she and David stepped inside, but it melted quickly beneath the warm embrace of their hosts. Ryan and Elena were the picture of effortless hospitality. Elena, poised and gracious, floated through the room like a seasoned hostess, her laughter soft and melodic. The table was set to perfection, candlelight flickering against pale blue walls, jazz humming low in the background, and the scent of roasted garlic wrapping the air like a comforting blanket. Claire hadn't expected to enjoy herself this much. Ryan, David's younger colleague, was magnetic, witty, confident, the kind of man who could fill a room with ease. Over glasses of red wine and stories from his recent trip abroad, everyone laughed freely. Claire watched David relax in a way she hadn't seen in months. Then came dessert. Chocolate mousse with fresh raspberries, and an unexpected comment that caught Claire off guard. "I heard you're quite the gardener," Ryan said, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet spark. "My roses are in trouble. Maybe you could give them a professional's eye," Claire chuckled, brushing off the compliment. "I wouldn't say professional, just patient. But I'd be happy to take a look. A harmless offer. A neighborly gesture." But as Ryan led her outside, through the sliding door and into the moonlit garden, Claire couldn't shake a strange feeling stirring beneath the surface. There, under strings of twinkling lights, surrounded by wilting roses and the scent of jasmine, something quietly shifted. And she didn't know it yet. But nothing about this evening would be as simple as it first seemed. The air outside was cool, laced with the scent of jasmine and something else. Something unspoken. Claire followed Ryan into the garden, where strings of soft lights hovered above like tiny stars. He knelt beside a struggling rosebush, gently brushing its yellowed leaves with his fingertips. "See this?" he asked, his voice lower now, more intimate. "They're fading. I've done everything I know how." Claire crouched beside him, careful to keep her distance. "Looks like they're low on nitrogen," she offered, her voice steadier than she felt. But when she glanced up, Ryan wasn't looking at the plant. He was looking at her, with eyes full of something she couldn't name. Not desire exactly, not admiration. Something quieter, sadder, real. "You and David seem solid," he said suddenly. "Elena and we've grown apart, 20 years together, but lately it feels like we're just coexisting." Claire blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. "Every marriage has its seasons," she replied softly, unsure if she was comforting him or herself. He nodded, then, without warning, his hand brushed hers. Just a light touch. Brief, barely there. But it was enough. A jolt of something electric passed through her. Her breath caught. Guilt rose up in her chest, immediate and sharp. But behind it, a long dormant part of her stirred, stretching awake. Ryan quickly pulled back. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes wide with remorse. "That was out of line." Claire hesitated, Her instincts screamed to retreat, but instead she offered a quiet, almost involuntary reply. "It's okay." And in that instant, something unspoken passed between them. Not an affair, not even a flirtation, just recognition, the kind that lingers long after the moment has passed. Back inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around Claire like a blanket, but something inside her had shifted. David smiled at her from across the room, familiar, steady, safe. She smiled back, but it didn't feel the same. Not because of anything he'd done, but because of what she now felt. Across the room, Ryan stood quietly, his earlier charm replaced with careful distance. He avoided her gaze, his posture respectful, even withdrawn. The evening carried on politely, conversation flowing easily, but Claire's mind was a tangled knot of emotion. Later that night, lying beside David in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, she stared at the ceiling. The rhythmic rise and fall of his breath beside her should have been comforting. It always had been. But now the stillness only made the questions louder. What had that moment in the garden really meant? Was it just a flicker of flattery, an aging woman momentarily thrilled by attention she hadn't expected? Or had Ryan touched something deeper? Something she'd buried under years of routine and quiet devotion? The memory replayed on a loop. His hand grazing hers, the look in his eyes, the way her heart had answered without permission. Claire wasn't foolish. She knew the difference between fantasy and reality. She loved David, she always had, but for the first time in decades, she felt seen. And not just seen, felt, as if someone had cracked open a hidden door she'd forgotten existed. She couldn't explain it yet. She wasn't even sure she wanted to. But deep beneath the guilt, beneath the confusion, a single truth shimmered quietly. Something had awakened inside her, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't put it back to sleep. The garden had always been Claire's sanctuary, a place where things made sense, where she could prune, plant, and breathe. But that afternoon, as she stood beside her blooming lilacs, her hands moved on instinct while her mind spun in circles. She had almost convinced herself the moment with Ryan had been nothing, an emotional ripple she could bury beneath fresh soil and good intentions. Then David's voice called from the porch. "Claire, you've got a visitor." Her breath caught, and there he was. Ryan stood by the steps, dressed casually, his smile polite but his eyes careful, like a man trying not to step on broken glass. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his tone soft. "I was just hoping for some more rose advice." Claire forced a smile, heart pounding with a mix of dread and something dangerously close to anticipation. "Of course," she replied too quickly. David, blissfully unaware, waved them off with a chuckle. "I'll leave you two garden experts to it." And just like that, they were alone again. This time, the silence between them buzzed with everything they hadn't said. Birds chirped around them, the world oblivious to the storm brewing in her chest. "I wanted to apologize," Ryan said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "For the other night, I crossed a line and I felt terrible ever since." Claire met his eyes. The sincerity there was unmistakable. So was the sadness. "You don't need to apologize," she said gently. "Nothing happened." Ryan stepped closer. "But something did happen. We both felt it." The air thickened. Claire's heart thundered. She wanted to run and stay, because while nothing had happened, everything had changed. Claire didn't want to hear the words, and yet part of her had been waiting for them. "I can't stop thinking about you," Ryan said quietly, his voice low but steady. "I haven't felt this kind of connection in years." They stood close, too close, in the dappled light of the garden, surrounded by blooming life and impossible tension. Claire's hands trembled slightly at her sides, her mind warring with itself. "Ryan," she whispered, the name tasting dangerous on her lips. "I'm married. Happily married." "I know," he replied gently. "And the last thing I want is to destroy that. But this, what's happening between us, it's real. I needed you to know." His vulnerability pierced her like sunlight through fog, warm, blinding, undeniable. She looked away, emotions crashing like waves inside her. "I appreciate your honesty," she said at last, her voice barely holding steady. "And I'll admit, your words touched me, more than I expected. But we can't act on this, it wouldn't be fair to anyone." He nodded slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening as he stepped back slightly. "I respect that, truly. All I want is your friendship, if that's all you can give." Claire hesitated. Friendship, a safe word, a fragile barrier. But when his hand reached out and gently took hers, something inside her softened. His touch was warm and steady, and her fingers curled around his before she could stop them. "Friendship," she echoed quietly. And though the word left her lips, the look they shared said so much more. Because lines had already blurred, and boundaries once clear now felt impossibly thin. As he left, the garden felt different, no longer a sanctuary, but a place of awakening. And deep inside, Claire knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Claire told herself it would be fine. A company gala, a crowded ballroom, polite conversation, and plenty of space to keep everything appropriate. But the moment she stepped inside, hand in hand with David, and saw Ryan across the room, her heart betrayed her with a sudden, sharp ache. Their eyes met instantly. One glance. That was all it took to remind her of everything unsaid. The evening unfolded like a performance. Sparkling chandeliers overhead, elegant music drifting through the air, laughter and clinking glasses surrounding them. David, ever the gracious husband, beamed with pride as they mingled with colleagues. Elena chatted easily, dressed in a sapphire gown that shimmered under the lights. And Ryan? He moved through the room with practiced charm, but his attention flickered back to Claire more times than she could count. Each glance was a whisper, each smile a tether. During dinner, they sat across from each other, separated by spouses and silverware, but not by emotion. Beneath the polished conversation, something else pulsed quietly, longing. When the music shifted and couples began to dance, David, sweet, unsuspecting David, stood and offered his hand to Elena with a warm laugh. "Care to dance?" She accepted with a smile. And just like that, Claire and Ryan were alone again. He didn't speak at first, just extended his hand. Claire hesitated. Then, heart-pounding, she placed her hand in his. They danced slowly, the world blurring around them. "You look beautiful tonight," Ryan whispered. Claire's breath caught. "We agreed to be friends," she said, the words barely audible. His eyes locked on hers, full of softness and restraint. "Friendship doesn't stop me from caring. It doesn't stop me from seeing you." And as the song ended, they lingered, too close, too long, teetering on the edge of something neither of them dared name. The days that followed the gala were a blur of conflicted emotions. Claire buried herself in routine, gardening, books, quiet dinners with David, pretending everything was normal. But inside, nothing was. Ryan's words echoed in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. The way he'd looked at her on the dance floor, it stayed with her, haunting and exhilarating. Then came the message. "Claire, can we talk? I promise it's important." Her heart stuttered the moment she read it. She didn't need to ask who it was from, she knew. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, neutral ground, public, safe. Yet as Claire entered the cozy little space, lined with the scent of espresso and soft acoustic music, everything inside her felt far from safe. Ryan was already there, seated in a corner booth, his hands clenched, his expression tight. "Thanks for coming," he said softly as she sat across from him. Claire studied him, sensing something different. Urgency, yes, but also fear. "What is it?" she asked, barely breathing. He exhaled hard, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Elena knows," he said. "She sensed something at the gala. Confronted me yesterday. I couldn't lie." Claire's stomach dropped. "I told her everything," Ryan continued, voice trembling with restraint. "Not that anything happened, but how I feel, about you." A cold wave of dread swept over her. "Oh my God, Ryan, you don't have to say anything," he said quickly. his eyes full of pleading calm. But Elena and I agreed. Whatever happens next, I had to speak with you first. You deserve clarity. Claire sat frozen, the quiet hum of the cafe fading into nothing. Clarity. It was all she'd wanted. And now she had to decide what to do with it. Claire gripped the edge of her coffee cup, trying to still the trembling in her hands. Across from her, Ryan looked both strong and undone, like a man holding himself together by sheer will. I told Elena I'd respect whatever choice you make, he said gently. If you want to walk away, I'll accept it. But if you feel even half of what I feel, Claire, we owe it to ourselves to face that. His words settled like heavy stones in her chest. Truth. That's all he was offering. No pressure, no demands, just raw, unguarded truth. Claire's voice wavered as she spoke. You've awakened something in me, Ryan. Something I didn't know was still alive. She paused, blinking back tears. But David, he's been my life for over 30 years. He doesn't deserve to be hurt. Ryan reached for her hand, gently, his fingers barely grazing hers. I'd never ask you to betray that, but I can't lie to myself either. What we found, it's rare. Claire's heart ached, torn between loyalty and longing, between the man who had been her constant and the one who now stirred her soul. I don't want to lose David, she whispered, and I don't want to hurt Elena either. I understand, Ryan said quietly, but hiding what we feel doesn't protect anyone. Sometimes honesty is the only way forward. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window panes, like time itself urging her to speak her truth. I need to talk to David, Claire said finally, her voice shaking with the weight of what that would mean. He deserves to hear this from me. Ryan nodded, slowly releasing her hand. Whatever happens, Claire, friendship, something more, I'll be here. You're not alone. And for the first time, Claire believed him. That night, the house felt too quiet. Claire sat on the couch beside David, the familiar comfort of his presence both soothing and suffocating. The weight of the secret pulsed inside her, begging for release. She glanced at him, his gentle eyes behind reading glasses, the same man who had loved her faithfully through decades of laughter, sorrow, and everything in between. And now she was about to break his heart. David, she said softly, her voice cracking, I need to tell you something. He lowered his newspaper slowly, his face shifting into quiet concern. Is everything all right? She swallowed hard. Something happened recently, not physically, but emotionally. I felt drawn to someone else. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Hurt, confusion, something deeper. Ryan, he said quietly. Claire nodded, tears already blurring her vision. I didn't want this. I didn't expect it. I love you, David. I always have. But something about him made me feel awake, seen, in a way I didn't realize I was missing. She braced herself for anger, accusation. But instead, David simply reached for her hand. Thank you for telling me, he said, his voice low and steady. You could have hidden it, but you didn't. That matters. Claire's tears flowed freely now. I'm so sorry. He shook his head. Don't apologize for being human. 30 years is a long time. People change. Sometimes love changes too. Claire's heart cracked open, not from guilt, but from the grace in his eyes. His kindness was unbearable. I don't know what to do, she whispered. David gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Then we'll take time to figure it out. Whatever your heart decides, I just want you to be happy. In that moment, Claire realized the depth of his love, strong enough to set her free. In the days that followed her confession, the world didn't fall apart. In fact, it felt almost surreal, like walking through a dream where everything looked the same, but nothing quite was. Claire and David moved through their routines with quiet care. They didn't avoid each other, but something between them had undeniably shifted. Yet strangely, not in the way she feared. They began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. Not about bills or dinner plans, but about their fears, their unmet needs, and the quiet ways time had changed them. David listened, and when he spoke, he was honest. Not angry, just open. Meanwhile, Ryan and Elena chose their own path. Counseling, reflection, unpacking years of emotional distance. There were no guarantees, but there was effort, and that mattered. Claire and Ryan agreed to keep their distance. No messages, no accidental meetings. They needed space, real space, to understand what this connection truly meant without the fog of urgency or temptation. And in that silence, Claire found something unexpected. Clarity. It wasn't about choosing between two men. It was about choosing herself, what she needed, who she was becoming. One sunny afternoon, as she trimmed her hydrangeas, David approached her with 2 cups of tea. He sat beside her on the garden bench, the same one they'd shared for years. "Claire," he began gently, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." She turned to him, sensing something in his voice, something tender and terrifying. "I realized our marriage has always been about more than love," he continued. "It's been about respect, friendship, honesty. Maybe what we need now is space, a chance to explore happiness wherever that leads." Her eyes filled with tears at his grace. Because sometimes love doesn't mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go. Claire sat in her garden, a soft breeze moving through the flowers she'd planted with care over the years. It was her favorite place, the one that always helped her think clearly. Only now, everything looked different. David's words still echoed in her mind. "I love you enough to let you figure out what your heart truly desires." There was no bitterness in him, only love. The kind that doesn't cage, but releases. She'd expected anger. Maybe even the end of everything. But what she received instead was the greatest gift he had ever given her. Freedom. Not just the freedom to explore her feelings for Ryan, but the freedom to rediscover herself. Ryan and Elena were on their own journey now, walking through the wreckage of honesty with courage. Claire didn't know what the future held for them, or for her. And for the first time, she wasn't rushing to find the answer. Each day felt like a step forward, and sometimes a step back. She still shared quiet moments with David. Tea in the garden, short walks, even laughter now and then. But there was space now. Space to breathe, to reflect, to grow. One afternoon, as she clipped away dead blooms, David sat beside her again. No expectations, just presence. Inside the house, she heard Ryan's voice. A casual visit, laughter shared between old friends. He and David had found a strange, tentative ease in each other's company, like men who understood the same storm from opposite sides. Claire looked up at the sky, soft clouds drifting across a blue canvas, and finally understood something. Life, like her garden, was never meant to stay still. It needed pruning, change, wild growth, and messy renewal. And sometimes the most unexpected paths were the ones that led us home. Months passed. The seasons shifted gently around Claire, just as she had shifted within herself. The ache of uncertainty never fully disappeared, but it softened, like an old bruise that no longer stings, only reminds. She still lived in the same house, walked the same garden paths, brewed tea in the same chipped porcelain pot. But the woman moving through those familiar spaces was not the same. She was softer in some ways, stronger in others, and more alive than she'd felt in years. David remained by her side, not as a husband clinging to history, but as a companion walking alongside her into whatever came next. Their love had changed shape. It was no longer defined by routine or titles, but by mutual care and unspoken understanding. And Ryan, he didn't vanish. Nor did he force a resolution. They stayed in quiet contact, measured, respectful. A slow and tender unfolding, one that neither rushed nor named. Some days, Claire thought of the life she'd had. Others, she dreamed of the one still waiting to be written. But more and more, she focused on the now. The quiet joy of planting a new seed. The thrill of an unexpected breeze. The strength it took to choose herself. Not out of rebellion, but out of love. Because in the end, it wasn't about a man or even a marriage. It was about becoming. About honoring what was real. About letting go of who she was told to be. And finally, blooming into who she was meant to become. The story hadn't ended. It had only just begun.